Americans are going to the polls, and you say, hey, why are you guys talking about American election? Well, we're talking about it because foreign policy comes from the leadership in the United States. The whole question of immigration and what happens to folks who are migrating to the United States is a major concern to us. There's the whole question of the assistance given to governments in protecting their borders and what comes through many of the U.S. organizations. So whatever happens at the top is going to affect us. It is my pleasure this morning to welcome my friend, Errol Louis, who is a New York City journalist, a television show host, and Errol is currently the host of Inside City Hall and many other things. He's known as the mind to go to, the lead broadcaster for New York One. Errol Louis, my brother, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I had a great teacher all along the way, Mr. Bishop.
And Errol and I go back for a long time, and he's been very kind. I don't think you can teach a man who already has the gift anything, but thank you very much anyway. Errol Louis, it is good to have you here this morning. I see you across CNN every time, and every time I look around, and I see you trying to bring that common sense into focus, which is that we cannot just believe in all these polls, but the civility or incivility that we have seen in this campaign, before I get down to some other meat areas of it, is something that leaves a lot to be desired. You cannot export something and tell the rest of the world this is the direction to go when you exhibit such a poor representation of democracy. I mean, I'm talking about the lack of policy and incivility, crudeness, factual dishonesty, and what is clearly absent is the question of accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been, I think the latest poll that I saw, something like 82% of the population describe themselves as disgusted with the campaign, and there's reason for that. I mean, this will be my 10th time voting in a presidential election, general election in the United States, and I can't remember another one. Not Reagan, not Bush, not Clinton, and never even after the impeachment, where there was so much in the way of outright plain dishonesty, where there was racial bigotry that was being fomented, when there were calls from violence from the podium, which I've never, ever imagined I would ever have to see. But we had all of those things and more in this election. So, there's a consensus developing, I think, that there will be a need for healing and for repair, both within the political parties, but among the population in general, because there's been some poison injected into the system, is I think probably the neatest way to think about it, and we're going to have to get that poison out.
You and I have spent many years in the belly of the beast through talk radio trying to work with this. So to us, some of the things may not be as disturbing as they are to the rest of the world who are not behind the baseball bat, as it were, now seeing this sort of madness coming out. It is true that we have had the demagoguery before. It is true we have had these populists coming up, which describes Donald Trump. What is not true is the last thing that occurred that seemed to have shifted the balance of this, when a supposedly neutral organization like the FBI come out with something that is unsubstantiated with fact, or at least without a context, and makes an ambiguous statement like that was made by the FBI chief that has now tilted the balance, some believe, in the favor of Mr. Trump. Speak to the FBI letter that was revealed only last week.
Well, the facts behind it are disturbing, and we don't know a lot, but what we do know is very disturbing, which is that although there is a well-established written policy that the FBI should do as little as possible to be even perceived as affecting elections in the final 60 days, despite that long-standing policy, they saw fit to send a letter to the chairs of the major committees in Congress saying that they have some information that might be relevant. And they hadn't even seen this information yet. They hadn't received a court warrant to actually look through a particular computer that they'd found. And they discovered it pretty late in the game, and they just kind of put it out there. And then to make things a little bit worse, former mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, who's a very big Trump supporter, went on the air a few days before the FBI letter came out and said, we have a few tricks up our sleeve. Now, he used to work in the Justice Department, and the FBI basically had to report to him. He's got lots and lots of contacts in the FBI. And so he was clearly saying, and he was asked in the national interview, are you saying you have information from inside the FBI? And he said, oh, yes. And then this letter came out. And so the letter was damaging to Hillary Clinton. The letter had no factual basis to it. The letter was clearly leaked to the Trump campaign. And what has been compromised here is one of the institutions that had been seen as not just apolitical, but as worthy of respect. And that's been the worst part of this campaign, is that one institution after another. And, you and I know and have often talked about how democracy is more than just going in to cast your vote on election day. It's a series of institutions. It's the courts. It's law enforcement, like the FBI. It's the political parties. It's the media. And one institution after another appears to have been compromised or corrupted, or at least swayed off of its normal path. And it makes you fear for how the system can hold together.
The leading voice for political broadcasting on New York One and New York City, which is the 24-hour cycle of news for all of the city, is my guest. He's also director of the urban reporting program at the City University of New York. Errol Louis is his name, and we're very happy to have him here with me this morning. 37 million early votes already been cast. Folks are saying that you may end up with what happened before, which is the popular vote may go one way, but that does not mean that you are in fact going to win the election, because there's the question of the electoral votes, which number 270. Most folks do not understand this electoral college versus the popular vote question. So before we go further down, just differentiate between the college and the popular vote so we are all on the same page.
Okay, sure, yeah. Each state in the United States, each of the 50 states, has a number associated with it. That number roughly corresponds to the population of that state. Not entirely, but with some variations that are not even worth going into. Every state gets at least 3. And so there are some that are really tiny and get 3, and some that are slightly less tiny and also get 3. California is the biggest with 55. New York's number is 29. And all you have to do in order to win, you have to win all of a state. And you have to, if you win all of California, you get all 55 votes.
Let me pause you just for a moment so we're very clear. So if you go to California and you win the popular vote in California, you get all the electoral votes.
Right. It's winner take all. So, getting 49% in California is not good enough. You have to win California. And so we associate a number with each state. 270 is the number to win. And Democrats, it so happens, start out with a tremendous advantage because big states like New York, like California, like Michigan, like Minnesota, they tend to end up in the Democratic column. And you look at the polls state by state, and it becomes clear that Mrs. Clinton has a tremendous advantage going into Election Day.
So is it fair to say that you believe that Mrs. Clinton will, in fact, emerge with the 270 required?
Well, let's put it this way, and this is an interesting factor that you'll appreciate, and I hope your listeners will as well, which is that the most precious commodity in the closing hours of a campaign is the candidate's time. Where do you put him or her? Today, Sunday, Donald Trump is going to Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan. He's going to a series of states that Republicans have not won in a generation, or in some cases 2 generations. The last Republican president that won Minnesota was Richard Nixon in the 1970s. So
young voters will ask the question, "Who is he?" But yes.
Yeah, well, exactly. So you have Trump making what is essentially a last-ditch effort to try to assemble the numbers that he would need to get to 270. But he's not doing well enough in the states that he would need to carry. Frankly, I mean, even if he won Ohio and Florida and North Carolina, he'll still lose. He has to win in Nevada, and he has to win in New Mexico or Colorado. He's trying all kinds of different places, but the problem for Donald Trump is that many of these states are not as old. I should say they're not as white as they used to be.
They're now more diverse, way much so. The voice you're hearing, listeners, in case you just tuned in, is that of New York One preeminent broadcaster, the man who I believe I've known him to have a fantastic mind for looking at numbers and understanding politics. That's why he leads the broadcast team up there, and he's frequently seen on CNN. His name is Errol Louis. We're very happy to have him here. There are a couple of things going on here. You and I have learned, as many many before us have taught us, never bet on humans, horses, or politics. so we know that to be a fact. But what we have a lot of what is called 5-minute polls. You've got a poll coming up just about every 5 minutes saying something different. Folks are trying to equate the response to Barack Obama with the black vote as being down for Hillary this year, which is really a little dishonest, because, I mean, you cannot be expecting that you had the first black candidate then and have the same turnover. However, the equalizer, many argue, is going to be the majority, minority, or the Latino vote, and the difference that is going to make here. How big an impact is that?
That is a big deal. It depends on which state you're talking about, but the Latino vote is surging to record levels, or there are some indications that it will have done so by the end of this process. So here is one of my favorite little hints that we got that something was going on was after the first debate, the week of the first presidential debate, the third most requested search on Google was a question in Spanish saying, "Where do I register to vote?" Registrarse para votar. This was a big hint to the Trump campaign that the chickens were coming home to roost. That all of the statements that were made, denigrating and dismissing the idea of Latinos as valued immigrants, the threats to find and deport millions of them, the threat to shut down the borders in such a way and to build a wall so that they could not enter this country. All of this is coming back, and it will play itself out in most places. The places that are going to really hurt, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, Nevada, Florida. It puts New Mexico essentially out of reach. It makes Colorado very difficult to win. And Latinos have been showing up in some other places that you and I haven't really been paying attention to, but in Georgia and in North Carolina, some places in the Deep South, where they were brought in as cheap labor to run some of the chicken factories, which are essentially industrial agriculture. And they stayed. They formed communities. They formed, as you all and your listeners all know, sort of an immigration pipeline, where people from the same town all end up in the same town here. And they've even, in Georgia, elected a Latina mayor of some tiny town. So the country's not the country it used to be, and the expectation is that Donald Trump is finding that out the hard way.
There is something you mentioned there, immigration, and immigration is one of the reasons we're having this discussion outside of the fact that the whole world is looking at what happens in America for this November 8th election. But the area of immigration, while the attention has been paid on Latinos, which is to say Mexico and the wall and so on, Donald Trump's general idea of America for America and everybody else will wait will in fact not just impact on Latin American countries, will not just impact on Mexico, but will impact on folks in the Caribbean equally.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the cat's out the bag. Just the fact that the conversation happened, there's a broad assumption now in this country that our trade deals are all to the disadvantage of the United States, which I know in the Caribbean comes as a great surprise. But somehow it's been established as a belief here, if not truth, that we haven't been tough enough, that we've been too generous to the other countries that we trade with. This is going to be a big problem. It's a big problem for the United States, for one thing. The assumption here somehow is that if we were less generous, if we made it harder to import goods, if we made it harder for people to come here for school and for business and to start families, that the United States that people would have more jobs here, or that the economy would somehow do better. And it doesn't matter how many economists you line up, and it doesn't matter how many numbers you put out. There are some people who are just convinced of that to the bottom of their soul, and there's not a lot you can do with those people. So this election is a referendum on that idea, but unfortunately, I will tell you, the idea has taken hold. So even Mrs. Clinton, who helped negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was intended as a broad way of getting the United States intimately involved in and in a position of strength to do trade with the Asian nations, she has said that she's going to let it lapse. She's going to kind of drop it. It had not been completely finalized, and it certainly hadn't been implemented, she said she won't implement it. And she said that because the politics of this election were such that from left and from right, there was all of this bashing of the idea of trade, the notion that somehow trade is a zero-sum game, and if we're doing something that benefits another country, it can only disadvantage the United States. Counter to everything I've ever learned about this stuff. But
that is what is really amazing, because you've been able in your inimitable style to bring in some of the issues here that, folks in the Caribbean may not have been looking at. That whole question of trade, because Trump has spoken repeatedly about tariffs. It means he's spoken about trashing a lot of the negotiations for trade that America has with the world. What we are looking at is an American divorce from the rest of the world, a sort of Brexit, exit from the rest of the world, and working just as America by itself. That is going to impact on all of the region that's trading with the United States. In addition to, speaking of this America first and America only, the way he's doing, even where we get assistance from American agencies to help patrol our borders, under the the discussion before has been, well, let us stop them from coming out. That is the drugs coming out of Latin America, South America, and stop it before it gets to the border. So we work with the countries around that we have trade deals with. He is saying, I will quash all of that and just concentrate on the American border, as though it will leave everywhere else and just stop outside of Manhattan.
I mean, that, I think, for New Yorkers in particular, was always the biggest joke, which is this notion that we'll build a wall in order to stop undocumented immigrants from taking up residence here. The reality is, and you know and I know, we both live just a few miles from one of the biggest border crossings, which happens to be John F. Kennedy Airport, where people come in perfectly legally to stay for a tourist period of time, 30 days, 60 days, and then they just forget to go home. I mean, and there's no wall that can stop that. And they find jobs because they are needed here. They find jobs because there are jobs to be done that Americans will not do or don't want to do. And it's been going on for 100 years now. And this notion that you can somehow reverse all of that, this notion that you can somehow build a wall on the southern border at a cost of billions of dollars, and somehow stop the process that I just described to you from happening. It was always a little bit mad, but there are a lot of people who believe it. And at every single Donald Trump rally that he goes to, there's a chant of "build that wall," because people do believe that that's it's a great metaphor for the simplicity, the simplistic nature of a lot of these arguments.
Well, it's simplistic, but it's also dangerous when you hear chants also of lock her up, because this is consistent with what has been called, quote unquote, banana republic politics. I mean,
that was one of those. That was one of the low points, I have to say. I've been doing this now for about 30 years, but to sit there in the skybox in Cleveland at the Republican convention and to see the chance of lock her up. And they were led not just by anybody, but by Governor Chris Christie, governor of one of the biggest states of the nation.
Oh, you're speaking of Bridgegate Christie.
Well, yeah, right. Well, right. Karma does come back.
Hello.
He had been a former prosecutor, a high-ranking member of the Justice Department. And here he is on, lock her up. And, of course, in that kind of quasi-mob situation, there are no questions asked about, well, lock her up for what? What crime are we talking about? Where is the proof and the evidence and the due process?
I don't think you have seen anybody at any time fancy-free and loose with the facts as we have seen in this election, because there is no accountability. There are lies with impunity. There is the broadest interpretation and distorted interpretation of many things being thrown out there. And I've heard some of the surrogates say things like, I didn't hear him say that. I don't think that is what he means. Is the only person who say, Errol Louis, I like you, and tomorrow somebody's got to qualify what like means.
Right. No, it's extraordinary, and in fact, it was Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House, leader of Congress years ago, who was a Donald Trump supporter, who said it is a specific part of the Trump strategy to discredit the press, and he said this early on, to discredit the media so that people will not believe what we report, sometimes even if it's a video that's played without editing, people just choose not to believe it.
I got to ask you the million-dollar question, but before I do that, that is a very good point you made. This is the man who called reporters the scum of the earth in so many words. This is the man who has done everything to undermine every existing institution. And then the classic was his wife to say that there is too much incivility in the campaign. I said, what?
That was remarkable. I will tell you,
it was better
Rennie,
it was better when she took Michelle Obama's speech.
Yeah, well, this is true. I am proudly listed on the New York Times website as one of the 282 people, places, and things Donald Trump has insulted on Twitter.
Errol, by the way, let me ask you the million-dollar question. How you think this is going to play out on Tuesday?
I think on Tuesday there will, and I'll put the big caveat in, barring any big surprises. I think barring any big surprises, we will get an outcome similar to what we saw 4 years ago.
The threat is that she will be held in court, or not in court rather, but with hearing after hearing, should she win. But there is also the threat that the Supreme Court will continue to operate minus one judge. So the down ballot really becomes an issue. Do you think down ballot, and explain that to our listeners exactly what that means and how you think that will foretell for a Hillary Clinton victory?
Yes, the government of the United States is not just the presidency, but there's the Senate, and the Senate is closely divided between Republicans and Democrats. If Democrats win 5 seats, or at least 4 on Tuesday, then they will have control of the Senate, and it will be easier for a President Hillary Clinton to get things done. And so you then have to go state by state. There are a lot of different seats that are up. And the last time I looked, it looked as if the Democrats were on track to take control of the Senate. That will be short-lived, by the way, because 2 years from now we'll do it all over again. And the Democrats will be defending 24 seats, including in some very inhospitable jurisdictions. And they're going to have a very hard time holding on to that majority. But my sense of it, my analysis, is that they will probably get control on Tuesday.
Okay.
And that will make it easier if Hillary Clinton does win. It will make for deadlock if Donald Trump wins. And the reality is all of this reflects the closely divided nature of American politics right now.
As a columnist and a board member and a member of the editorial board with the New York Daily News, you have held my respect from then. Nothing has diminished that. As a matter of fact, it has been elevated. Errol Louis, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me this morning. But before you go, I need to find out about those Trinidad roots you have. You know, I'm not going to have you on radio in Trinidad and Tobago and not talk about those roots.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. My father's parents, Errol Louis and Eugenia Stevens, were from Belmont. And they came over here in the 1920s and never went home. My dad was born shortly after they met, so my dad was born in the early to mid-30s. He was born in 34. Happy and healthy, by the way. We're hoping to bring him down there in the spring.
Yes.
And, I've made one visit. My sisters have made no visits. And everybody I run to, including you, Rennie, keeps telling me, what are you waiting for? So we're not waiting any longer. When my son is out of school on spring break, we're going to come down.
If you ever want to find out the one behind this gentleman's sale, go to the prince. That is his son. Errol Louis, my brother, it's great to hear you, and thank you so much for your insight and the clarity and the context that you provided this morning.
All right. Thank you, Rennie.
You have a wonderful day now.
You too.
Thank you so much. Errol Louis out of New York City talking about American politics.